All right, friends, welcome to week 4, lecture 1. We are approaching the halfway mark. Really, we're past the halfway mark from the belt exam perspective, which is crazy. So lots of fun there. We are doing a ton of stuff. But yeah, we are halfway. That is insane. Think about, usually at this time, I like to reflect. We are starting a little bit late, so I want to maybe not take a ton of time, but this is usually a moment. Week 4 is yes, these do fly by. There's usually a moment where people sort of start panicking and saying, "Oh no, like there's a lot going on." And I hear that. That is very true, and I feel that. And sometimes though, people sit and say, "I don't understand this and I can't understand this." But what I like to remind you guys is to look back at when we started and your knowledge of React and your knowledge of JavaScript versus where we're at now. And if I were to throw out words like use effect and use state and understanding state and keeping track of state on day one, you would have been very confused. And maybe it's still not the clearest concept, but just realizing how far you've come in these last 4 weeks, 3 weeks, technically, because this is week 4, is usually a good thing to be like, actually, no, I can do this. I've learned a lot. And so give yourself some grace there. If you feel like you're struggling, please feel free to reach out to Gray and I. But also be kind to yourself and realize, hey, you're doing a really hard thing. A lot of you guys have other jobs too. Like, kudos to you. We're halfway through. We got this. It's a little bit of a ramp, not even a ramp up. Really, we have maybe this week and half of next week where we're learning new material and then we're just throwing everything together. So it's not, it's not like we still have a ton left and we're going to go all the way to week 6 and we're learning, all this new material up until the last day. Nope. I think by the end of next week, my plan is that we will be done learning all of our new material. And then we're going to spend a week and a half going through and building projects that is going to use everything. That way you guys are really prepared for your exam. And then like we had talked about, we will deploy on the last day. That way you guys have that as well if you want to choose to go for that black belt or not. A little bit of housekeeping. Here's some discussion questions. I'm going to say this every time. Discussion questions due 11:59 p.m. PST. We've got 3 core assignments this week. They are pretty light. I know to-do list was kind of crazy, but this week they're pretty light. We've got Axios Pokemon API. That was based on the material basically last week that we learned with this API calls and using Axios. Then we're going to do some routing practice, which we're going to learn about routing today and the different tools that we can use to route. And then you've got Faker API. Now, Faker API isn't super challenging. There is just basically, it's our last thing before using a database that we're going to generate some information. And then actually on Thursday, I'm going to introduce MongoDB to you guys. So that way it can maybe start making sense a little bit. I will be sending out an email tomorrow with something called a mid-stack survey. As if I know, guys, we give you a lot of surveys. And if if it was my opportunity and option, I wouldn't do that. But we have 2 really big ones for this class. It's the mid-stack and the end of stack. These surveys are great for me to understand if there's things I can change in teaching, which I want to do. It's a great time to sort of say some of that stuff. Obviously, hopefully, if there's an issue before then, you would have ever reached out to me because I always want to adhere to your learning styles and things that you can do. But I will be sending that and we'll spend a little bit of time in class tomorrow, just giving you guys an opportunity to do the mid-stack survey. Any questions on that before I sort of jump into a recap of last week and then a preview of this week? Okay. Just as a recap of last week, we learned some really fundamental things, right? We learned about lifting state and what that means, where instead of state just being tied to one component, we can give it to a parent component and any children can use that. So we learned that. We learned about map and filter, ways that we could iterate through pieces of state or iterate or filter through and get some identifiers or using a unique identifier to get a specific piece of information, something we just looked at in office hour. Then we talked about different types of promises. We learned about a ton of stuff. We learned about fetch and APIs. We learned about use effect and Axios. async and await, a whole bunch of stuff. Last week was pretty full of knowledge, but really heavy in the APIs and being able to make a query to an API and get some information back and being able to handle that. And what we have on the docket for this week is we're going to learn about a tool called React Router, learn all about routing and why we have to use something like React Router versus other applications or other tools maybe that you have learned. Tomorrow, we're going to dive into Node and Express. It says create and read. We're not going to do that simply because I'll tell you why in a second, but we're going to talk about Node and Express. We're going to talk about how to download Express, how to use that. And we're actually going to start building, we're going to build our first backend server tomorrow. And then lastly is you might, if you looked ahead and you were working ahead, you might have seen this change is we're actually going to introduce MongoDB and Mongoose, MongoDB and Mongoose on Thursday versus doing it next week. The whole point of that is basically there was a lecture that I was going to build like a CRUD application, and but it was going to be like all within React, and that's not how it's ever going to work. You're never going to do that. So my thought is we'll actually introduce MongoDB next week, maybe spend 2 days. Thursday, and then Monday we'll go back over it and we're going to introduce CRUD. This is where we're really going to introduce CRUD because create, read, update, and delete. These are your CRUD, making a CRUD application. If we can create a user, update a user, delete a user, and read a user, right? And that really is going to be in play with your database. You're never going to do that from a state side. That's just not a real world thing. And so my thought is let's actually get the tools in place and then we can learn these topics, which I think is really going to help. So next week we're going to do that. And then we will start sort of our beginning of our build. We're going to then build out a full stack application that's going to resemble what the belt exam is going to be like. So we're going to build out every single piece. So that way you will have a functioning tool, a functioning application that mimics. It's not going to be the exact, because I can't do that, though I would love to. It's not going to be the exact same thing as the exam. It's got a lot of the same functionality. Really, the big pieces, like 80% of it's going to be the exact same sort of functionality where you're creating something, you've got a form, you're adding something to a database, you're reading it, you're deleting, you're updating. Oh, I am sorry. I don't know if you guys can hear that. Sorry.
No, we can't hear anything.
I'm hearing myself talk and it's tripping me out. Okay. Somehow that video started playing and it was tripping me out. I was listening to myself. Okay. So yeah, we'll have that and that'll be ready for you. Okay. Any questions on that? Any questions on sort of the recap of last week, preview of this week before we get started? Okay, cool. So we're going to dive in. Today, we're going to learn about routing. We're going to learn what is routing, how routing works from a conventional standpoint versus a single page application. That's what SPA stands for. We're going to learn a little bit about the anatomy of a URL and query parameters. I'm not going to hammer too hard on this because you don't necessarily need it, but it is a really big thing for the industry. So I want you guys to know about that. And I do have a little extra reading that I'll put in there for that. And then we're actually going to build out some routes and walk through that. I don't think we'll go over time, but we might go over by about 5 minutes because we started about 5 minutes late. So let's go ahead and jump in and get started. Here is where we are working, and we are working in this React section, and we're talking about what is routing. And from a very high level, all routing is we've talked about the request and response cycle from APIs, right? Where we make some sort of request and then we get something back, right? We make a request and all of a sudden we get something back from our, whatever our request is. We're requesting an API, if we're requesting to go to our friends page on Facebook, et cetera, et cetera. And the way that it normally works in a non-single page application is that we would have, I'm just going to come here, we would have this main page. So I'm going to call this like our home page right here, right? I'm going to type home. And let's say I wanted to And if you guys have taken another stack, you might understand how this works. You have this home, and it's usually like this home index or home.html or something like that. And if I make some sort of request or I want to go to a different route, what it will then do is I will put in my route and it will take me to a different page. Let's say it is my user dashboard. I want to go to my user dashboard and it'll go to this other page called user dashboard. Let me change that. Perfect. Now this is a totally different page. So the routing can handle that. If I say, localhost dot 5001/dashboard, it might take me to this, and it's a totally new and loaded page. And we can do that for a ton of things. If it was a user dashboard or a user dashboard, just one user or a friends list, you might have a ton of different pages that you can then get routed to, right? If I wanted to go to if I like to use Facebook, even though they're a single page application, if I wanted to go to their marketplace, that might be a page, right? And I have to build that page that I use a route, which is basically like a specific way. If you were to ask somebody, hey, how do I get here? And it's like, here's the directions to get to this page, same sort of thing, right? Where if I wanted to go to the marketplace, maybe I would type in localhost 8000 or 5001/marketplace, and it'll take me and it'll load this entirely new page, or, any sort of other thing. And I am going to all these different pages. Well, we had talked about that's not really how a single page application works. The way a single page application works is we've got one page and we have then a bunch of components, right? That I can interchange. I can swap them in and out. And so if I have a whole bunch of components here that I want to change, then I can do that. And so that is where our routing comes in play, where we're basically saying, okay, at this specific route, i.e. this request is being made, what piece of information am I flip-flopping in, right? So here, if I've just got this main application, but all of a sudden I wanted the marketplace, what this routing is going to do is it's going to command this page, command this guy right here, and say, these are what you're needing to see. These are the components you're wanting to show. And it's mimicking having multiple pages, right? I mean, that's sort of the power of a single page application, is it mimics having all of these pages, but it's just doing them on one application and one page. So that's what routing is going to handle. Is it's really just sort of a blueprint of what components are going to show when my user wants to go to marketplace. Cool, I want to show these components on this page. When my user wants to go to the friends list, cool, let's interchange, and this is what is going to show on this single page. Does that make sense? Does that make sense from a conventional versus single page application standpoint? You guys put a 1 in the chat if that makes sense. Cool. Cool. So if we're doing that, we're looking at this, we also have this other idea or this other aspect in the platform called the anatomy of a URL. Now, this isn't super important information in regards of what you're going to need to learn and know, but this is basically when we are having a route, here are some of the kind of main things that we want to talk about. We've talked about it a little bit when we talked about base URL with APIs, right? But you've got your protocol here, which is your HTTP, and you might see HTTPS, this subdomain. So here we're just looking at Coding Dojo, basically. We've got this learn, or we have login now. This is our old platform. Coding Dojo is the domain, .com is the domain level. You might see like .gov or .org, right? And then you've got this idea of this path. And this path is what we're going to see is what allows us to show specific aspects. If you think about even the Coding Dojo platform, it all sort of looks the same, right? You've got the same nav bar up top. You've got the same nav bar on the left, whichever one is highlighted, that's what changes. But really all we're changing is the material in here, right? All we're changing is the actual curriculum itself. And the way we know that this specific curriculum needs to be shown when this is hit is we're looking here, and in the back end, we have this sort of, you could sort of think about it like having a secret code. And once you have the secret code, you get the information that you want, right? And so this secret code is our unique identifier to say, this is what specifically needs to be shown when we're on this page right here. This is what specifically needs to be shown when we're on this page right here. Now, there is one more thing I wanted to show you, and this isn't, this has nothing to do sort of with the class and the belt exam per se, but something I wanted you to know, because whenever I was applying and whenever I ended up working at Twilio, this was a part of the application process, is they asked me a question about query parameters. And basically I had to build a program that handled query parameters, and did some, extracted that information so that I could do something else. So what a query parameter is we have sort of our base that we've seen, right? And this is a great thing. I'll put this in the chat for you guys. And then Gray, if you can put this in Discord too, that'd be awesome. And we have our base, we have all of our information here, but there are some parameters that we can use to pass in to give some additional information. I like this because it also uses Swappy, which is the Star Wars API, and it sort of allows you to expand on that. The way that a query string, it's called query string parameters, works is we would have our question mark added to our endpoint, right? So we have our endpoint here, which is, let's say, like this guy. This guy would be like our endpoint, right? Or our path. We add a question mark, and then after the question mark, we have a key. So you can think about it like a key value pair, where we've got our parameter and then the value we want to pass through. So even just with Swappy, if or the Pokemon API, instead of getting all of the Pokemon, if I just wanted to limit it to 7 or pass in these values of offset 24, and they do sort of change with each API. But basically, we can say by adding these additional parameters, we can say that we only want them to send back 7 Pokemon instances. Offset 24 means skip 1 through 24. And I want you to begin at the next number. So it's going to start at 25. So this is an additional way that I can add in some more information. There's other things that you know, if you were even looking at a ton of different things, there's query parameters to understand if it's any sort of marketing, how you're clicking on something's a really big one. So it's called like medium. So URL medium. So like, are they on their phone? Are they on their tablet? Are they on a desktop? All that information can also be passed in the string. And then you can gather that information to say, okay, you know, 80% of our users access this portion of our website on mobile. So maybe we focus on that portion, or, you know, doing something mobile, or just how does our website work? So that's kind of all I want to go through with query parameters, just knowing that you can pass in additional information. And because it came up in a job interview, I just want to make sure you guys were aware about it. It was honestly the first time I'd ever heard about it. So I had to go and learn. But I just wanted to give you guys that. Again, you can look at some more information. Here's a very broad and basic one for query parameters. So if you wanted to go, you can go way more in depth on them. Just wanted to give you guys access to that. Cool. So that's been in the chat. I think Gray put that in Discord. So thank you for doing that, Gray. Now we're going to move on to, or any questions about that before we move on to actually coding and doing some stuff in there? Cool. So now we're going to move on to React Router. Now, again, because this is a single page application, we have to have something to handle our routing, right? Something that is, you can sort of think about it as like a field general that says, okay, when somebody comes and gives me a request, I'm telling you to go here, I'm telling you to go here, I'm telling you to go here. So with that, there's a great tool. There's other tools out there. Really, the most popular is React Router. There's one that was called like Reach Router, I believe, is what an old version, but really just from a popularity standpoint, React Router is going to be the way to go here. And so in order for us to use this, in order for us to allow it to start creating routes and sort of helping our application, we actually have to install it. So if I come and I bring up my terminal, I don't have it installed. All I currently have is I created a React application, but that's it. So let's go ahead and install it. What I'm going to do is I'm in my lecture 1 in class. So I'm just going to say npm install React router DOM. Perfect. Now, if I come and look at my package JSON, I should see my React router. Oh, I didn't. Sorry. Let me cd into npm install. So I needed to cd into that React router DOM. Perfect. And now you see that it is there and we have access to this. It's in my package JSON. Perfect. So now that we have this, we can start using the actual values of React Router. And there's a couple main things that it has and a couple main portions of React Router. If we look at actually our program here, let me move this. A couple different pieces. We have this thing called browser router, routes, route, link, use params, and use navigate. Those are all things that we're going to learn today. But first one is browser router. Now on the platform, it shows that you sort of in your app.js, you put browser router, and that's totally fine. You can do this. What this is saying is when there's a request, here's where you can look, right? I want to filter the request through this. You can put it in your app.js. That'll work just fine. You will put it here. What you can also do, and sort of what I would sort of suggest is, especially for this, if we are just for our projects, you can go into your index.js and then say browser router. Oops. And this, we don't want it to be self-closing because we want to put our app within it. And then you also need to import it from React Router DOM. Now, what this is saying is when there is a request for a route, right? What browser router handles all of our routes for us. And so we're saying, hey, with this application right now, we're just putting it in the parent. This application, we want to handle the routes. So this is where we are going to handle our routes. Cool. Again, you could have done this and just wrapped everything in browser router, or you could just wrap the app in there and then it is good to go and taken care of. Cool. The next thing I want to do is actually create some routes, right? We actually want to create something and see how this works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some imports because in order for me to use these tools, I need to go ahead and import them. So I'm going to say import. I'm going to say routes, comma. I'm going to say route. And actually for right now, this is fine. Routes is going to be our keyword that allows us to say, this is where our routes live on this application. And then the route itself is going to identify our route. And I think it'll make sense here in a second. So here, if I say routes, perfect. Again, I don't want this to be self-closing. I just want this to be one, or I want to be able to nest all of my routes in this routes tag right here. Again, this routes tag comes from React Router DOM. So if you don't have that downloaded, it's not going to work. It's not like a native HTML tag. Cool. Now let's actually make our first one. So here I'm going to say route. And then what I need to add in actually is right here. So let's break down what exactly is happening. Within my routes, I'm going to say route and path. And this path is just if we just have this slash, that is our local host 3000 slash, right? Which is the slash will get dropped. That's just our base or what we call our root route. And so we identify the path we want to show. And then we say, well, what do we want to do? What component do we want to put here when that route is called, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a components folder, components. And then in here, I'm going to create one called home.jsx because this is sort of our home, right? RAFCE, perfect. Perfect. Or I'm just going to say, welcome to routing. Perfect. So now that I have my home, what I can say here is I'm just going to come in. I'm going to come into this. And then all I have to do is actually call my value. Now, because I'm calling this in my route, basically bringing in my component, I'm saying, hey, when this is called, add in this component. I still have to import that. But now if I come here and I say npm start, oops, npm start, it says welcome to routing. It says welcome to routing. Now let's go ahead and make another one. I'm going to make a contact.jsx just to show you the actual power of routing. So RAFCE contact, and I'm just going to actually make an H2. Thank you for contacting us. Perfect. So what I'm going to do is I want that to show when my route has a path of /contact. Now, again, the /contact inherits by default, the base is localhost 3000. And so if I were to say localhost 3000 /contact, it already believes localhost 3000, so I don't have to put that as well. So now, because I don't have contact, I can say import contact from components. Cool. So it says welcome to routing. But if I go to my actual route and say contact, you see, thank you for contacting us. This is the same page, same application, right? But we're able to swap in and out the components. Somebody asked on the Learn platform, I believe it had route path exact. Yes. So exact is a keyword that we can use in here. There's a couple different ways you can do it. What exact will do is sometimes if there is a partial, and it depends on how you set it up, what exact is saying is it has to do this exact pathway. Sometimes in different realms is if you were to have it like this, the way we've set it up, we are good. But if it, has just a slash, then it goes from top to bottom and it checks every single one. And because they all will have a slash, it'll assume that this is what you're talking about and it'll default to there. So you can add exact in here. You would just do something like this. And then what it basically is just is another way to basically, as long as it has to exactly match this. So it's just a sort of back burner way to make sure that your routing doesn't get messed up, which is a great thing to do. So I would encourage that you can add exact and then it'll do the same thing. Great question. Okay. So now we have two routes and we have two components and we're able to switch them in and out. We're able to switch them in and out, right? If I delete contact, it says welcome to routing, which is my home. If I say contact, then it takes me to my contact component. Awesome. We love that. Now, it doesn't make sense for our user to have to know what each of our paths are, right? And so I might want to put a button, or there's something else I'm thinking about in HTML that I can use that basically they can click on it and it can take me somewhere different. Anybody have any idea? Maybe if you guys, maybe if this is your second or third stack, what can I use here? Yeah, link to or link, exactly, right? So an anchor tag is in HTML what we'll typically use, an A tag, exactly, Cat. React doesn't allow for A tags. And I was reading on exactly trying to get exactly why, but it's basically the way that it works is the DOM itself. They don't want you manipulating the DOM itself. Just kind of sounds weird because that's what you're doing. But they want you to use components, is really the breakdown of why. That's everything I could find was they really, really, really want you to use components, not actually just manipulating the HTML itself. And remember, when we have this JSX, it goes through Babel and gets converted to HTML. So there's another thing we can use instead of doing an A tag in our HTML is we can actually bring in from React Router DOM another word called link. Link is going to be synonymous with A tag. They are doing the exact same thing, right? And so what I can do is here outside of my routes, because this isn't, again, we just want to pair our routes within our routes within the route tags. So outside of this, I want to just create a link. And I want to be able to send them to, let's make a home. Perfect. Just like this. To where if they click this, it takes us home. I'm going to put a BR. And I'm going to do a link for contact. Perfect. So now let's put another BR. So there's a little bit of space. We should have, perfect. We have home and contact. If I click this, it takes me to my home component. If I click contact, it takes me to my contact component. All it's doing is once this is clicked, and we don't have to put it on click, that's sort of built in with the functionality. It goes and it finds the route that matches this and then runs this, which then just brings in that contact component. So that's all link is doing. Any questions on this? Any questions on this? Somebody asked, I know you probably said it 100 times. What is the extension that auto completes or shortcuts code? It's called GitHub Copilot. It's free for 60 days and then $10 a month after that. It's very good. And it's not, we've seen it's not perfect. It even interprets some things incorrectly, but it is a time saver. Okay. Yeah, of course, Alex. Now, there's a couple different things that we can do with this. Are there any questions on sort of links and routing before we get started, though? Just want to, because we've kind of cruised through some of this material. Any questions on bro? Go ahead.
So are you grouping all of your routes under the one routes thing, or would you have a example where you would actually have routes multiple times in your app.js, depending on like where you have it displaying?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for right now, all we would focus on is doing routes. And that's where some of the main things, like you can get pretty intricate if you got a big application and you might have different aspects that you want to do to where you have right now, this base is just localhost 3000, but maybe you have a ton of different components or different things with friends or, a marketplace or something like that. You might want it to have a base route of facebook.com/marketplace/something, right? And so you can handle and have multiple routes. There's other ways you could do it too. There's another tool called Switch, which kind of can handle different aspects as well. For what we're doing, you just need one. But yes, if you're trying to scale and have more, then it is feasible that you would have multiple.
Can you actually put routes inside of components as well?
Routes inside of components? I don't believe so. Maybe.
So you just have it on the one page. I mean, it's a single page application, so that would make sense if it's all just one thing. But depending upon which components you're using, might also depend upon which routes you want to show.
Sure.
No, that has to be in browser router. The routes one.
Oh, okay.
Because yeah, which then a browser router could be here, or it is our index.js, which is wrapping over our app.
Thank you.
Great questions, though. Any other questions?
Where would you go to change the base URL? Like in your previous example with the Facebook/marketplace/
Yeah, I believe you would handle, because you would have other, in our index, we'd have our app, but then whenever you are having multiple, like if you have much more, because you're not just gonna have one page, you might have different areas that you have this. Let me get back to you on that. That's a great question.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions? Cool. Okay. So we've talked about link, we've talked about route, we talked about browser router. Now, what if we wanted to have some sort of value? So let's say I wanted to create another component that's going to say contact type.jsx. Let's just say this. We wanted to have something different if they put in a super different value, or we wanted to have something if they typed in something different. So if I'm coming here and I've got this sort of information here, what I'm wanting to do is I want to have an H1 that says, thank you for contacting us through via. And I want this to change if they have any sort of, like if they want to text us, or they want to call us, or they want to do, email, doesn't matter. I want it to be able to, whenever a link gets my information, I want to be able to have that information. I want to get those parameters that we passed in, right? Or the values that we passed in. Right now, what's currently happening is we just have this contact, and that's just a word, right? And this is static, meaning that it has to be the word contact in order for it to get there. Now, if I wanted it to be dynamic and change based on what they did, and this is what we're really going to use when we deal with actually getting information. If I want to show a user and I want to show that user's page, I need it to be dynamic, right? If you saw at Coding Dojo, these change, right? This guy up here is different than this guy up here. And I still want them, I want to have that information, and I don't want to have to hard code this. It can pass in some information and me still handle and say, this is how I'm going to show this component. And so in order for us to create a dynamic route, I'm going to do something like this. I'm going to say route. We can say exact. Let's try exact. I don't know if exact works with dynamic routes, but I'm going to say path equals. And what I want is I want it to say contact. And then I want it to say type. Element contact type. Perfect. Now what this is doing is anytime I say /contact/type, type just becomes a variable for whatever word I put after /contact. Type just becomes a variable for any word I put after contact. So if I say contact / text, it's not going to show us anything because we haven't done anything yet. But what I can do is get this value using a tool called useParams. Is I can get the value. You can kind of think about it like props. It's not props, but it kind of operates the same way. I can destructure it and then use the value in my actual text, in my code. So in this case, for following this guy, I'm gonna come here. And up here, I'm gonna say const. Now, this is important that this word must match the word that we set up in our route. So I'm gonna say const type equals use params. Now, use params is similar to any of our routes or our link that we have to bring it in. So I'm gonna say import use params from React Router DOM. And now when this runs, when it comes here, I can say use params. I get the value that is typed in. And if I want, I can just inject it here. So let's come back from here. And if you see, I put type text and it says, thank you for contacting us via text. If I say unicorn, it says, thank you for contacting us via unicorn. So we're able to get the parameters from our request, from our route, and do something with them. If I wanted to have some sort of math and do some sort of math, I could do that. If I wanted to, the real thing we're going to do is, let's say that I have, instead of contact, this is user, and I wanted to have my base route and I have like users or user, and it had like their dashboard page, but I wanted to look at a specific user's page. I could say /user/ some ID number. And when I do that, I now have access to that ID number, and I can go and I can query my database. I can get all the information and show what I need on this component. So by using this use params, it allows us to grab information from our actual route itself and use that information. Now, one thing to note is it is not type specific. I believe it's a string. So let's see, let's console log type. I believe it comes in as a string. So if you were going to do some sort of numbers, let's see, console one. Oh, I console logged the value, not, yeah, give me one. I console logged the value, not type of. If I want to see something, I can say type of. And so console log is not defined. Do I have it spelled incorrectly? Oh, I added a capital O versus a lowercase. Type of. Here we go. Come back. We can see it as a string. So if you are going to do some sort of like value or some sort of mathematics, you need to typecast that. Just know that anytime it comes through, it is a string, and you can't set it to where like this has to be number, this has to be a a string, or this has to be X, Y, and Z. There's like a weird way using regex, but everything I was reading said that you probably shouldn't do that. So, but I am able to take this information and I am able to show that information on the screen. Cool. Any questions on that? Does that make sense? Using use params, I can grab the information from my route and I can show that here. Perfect. Cool. Now, the last thing I want to do is use navigate. So this idea of called use navigate, and it's a different way of, you can sort of think about it as like a link, but it's a different way that we can have some information or do something and take some information from like a form per se and actually send it somewhere else. So the platform goes over it. There's a few things we're going to have to do. I'm going to create a form real fast. Let me do something real quickly. I'm gonna come here. I'm gonna add bootstrap. Perfect. Now I can use bootstrap anywhere. Let's get rid of this. I'm going to create in my components folder, I'm going to create a form.jsx. Cool. Now, within this, I'm going to have my div, and then let's build my form. Then I'm going to say form dot column medium 3 dot mx auto. It's my form. I'm going to have a div of class form group. I'm going to have a label, and I'm going to have an input head form control with a div that closes it. That's perfect. So this is going to have a class name of form label. Perfect. There's a few things that are going to happen here. I need my button .btn info. Remember, this is just bootstrap. This is super simple bootstrap stuff, but a few things need to happen, right? First off, in order for me to have this, I need to change a few things. So if I have this form, right? If I'm handling this form, what are some things I need to do? Really, in order for me to submit this form, I need in what? Yeah, exactly, Chris. I need non-submit, right? So I'm gonna say on submit. Oops, it was too fast. I'm gonna say submit. I haven't made this yet, but I'm gonna make it handler. Perfect. It's gonna yell at me and say submit handler is not defined. Now, for the submit handler, let's go ahead and create it. I'm gonna use prevent default as always. Now, there's another thing I want to do. Do that. I just want this. Perfect. Is I want when this form is submitted, let's say that I have a contact form of how would you like to contact us? We already have our route set up where we can say contact/type, right? Say contact/type. Perfect. What we can do is I can take that information and then I can, once the form is submitted, I grab that information and then I can push it to another route. It's going to be called navigate is what we're going to use for that. And so because I don't have any other things, we just have one input. I'm going to do an on change here. That's just going to be equal to E. Give me 1 second. Also, I realize I'm so sorry. I've been on multiple people versus just one. So if the code is on the left or on the right, then I'm so sorry. Cool. Then I'm gonna say on my change, I need to have some sort of value, right? I want to keep the value that's in that input. So if I want to have that value, what do I need to add? What do I need to have here in order for me to keep my input style or my input value? Anybody remember? I want to keep that information. Yeah, exactly, Jonathan. I need some state, right? I need some state. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say const. I'm going to say type and set type. Those are going to be equal. Oops. Or is going to be equal to use state, right? So this type is just because I'm dealing with what type of contact do you want to have. So I'm going to call it type. It can be called unicorn. It can be called anything we wanted, right? So now I'm going to say set type. That's going to be E dot target, E dot target dot value, right? Perfect. Makes sense. So anytime this changes, I'm setting my state. I'm using set type to set type anytime that changes. So now if something's typed in, I have some state and I have some value. Perfect. Okay, now that everything's been set up, now that we have it all, let me say submit. What I need to do is I need to go in my app. And let's say that I have on my contact, I wanted to actually have that form because that makes sense, right? Thank you for contacting us, or we could change it to how would you like to contact us? And then I just need to call in form. Need to import form. From form. Because I'm already in my component, so I don't need to go into my components and do it. So now I have my form. If I save this, let's go see what this looks like. We've got an error of uState is not defined. Yep, that's correct. I said uState, but remember, we got uState. Perfect. Cool. So now if I come to contact, we have this, how would you like to contact us? This says name. We can change this to contact type. Perfect. So now what I want to do is when they do that, right? When they type in whatever way they want to contact us, I want to take that information that we have set in type, and I actually want to navigate to this route right here. And the way we're going to do that using use navigate is on my form. So on the component that I'm wanting to use this, I need to do a few things. I first need to import use navigate from React Router DOM. Second thing I need to do is I need to say const navigate equals use navigate. Now this is creating, this is running this use navigate, setting it equal to this value right here. This can be anything. It can be unicorn. It can be anything you want it to be. And then the last thing I'm doing is once this is submitted, and yes, I could have a, validator. I could have all that stuff. Not really the point of the class today. It's now I want to say navigate to, now it's not /type. Remember, it is contact /type. Now, what this is going to do is it is going to take whatever's in state. Then it's going to have that value. It's going to navigate to contact /something, whatever we type, right? Which is going to be caught right here. Then it's going to run this component with our information of type that we have access to, our parameter. So it's going to go and it's going to open up our contact type component. And it's going to say, thank you for contacting us via whatever is put in our form. So let's test it and try it. So if I refresh, perfect, I'm here and I say text and I submit. It says, thank you for contacting us via text. And you can see that now my URL is localhost 3000 /contact/text. If I go back to contact, I could say unicorn. Doesn't make sense. This is where we might have a handler, right? Thank you for contacting us via unicorn. So there's different ways. So sorry, this can handle any sort of thing that we pass in. So we're taking that information and then we are rerouting it back to contact unicorn, and we pass in that information. And so that way we can call it here. Again, this is us calling it on the page. We might want to navigate to something different. We might want to navigate to a user's, dashboard or something like that. We might want to take that information and use it that way as well. So use navigate is similar to link. There's a little bit of, it's really great for forms when we're wanting to do that. And it is really useful for after submitting a form. Perfect. Anybody have any questions? Any concerns? Any thoughts? That's all I have. We're exactly on time. But we've gone through all of our routing. We've installed React Router. We've handled components. We've done these different aspects, these different components using our different tools like link and use params and use navigate. These are hooks, right? We've got our components of route and routes, browser router, link. We're able to now navigate to and fro all around our application. Any questions? Just makes sense. You guys put a 1 in the chat if this makes sense. Cool. That is all I have for tonight. Again, tomorrow we are going to be looking at Express. We're going to be downloading Express, or basically installing it the same way that we install our React router. So we're going to look at Express, why we have Express. What are we going to do with that? The second thing we're going to look at is Postman. So if you guys haven't already, go ahead and download it. I don't believe this link works. And it's not a platform issue because even on Postman, if you were to just go to Postman itself, which is so funny because it's like an enterprise tool. But if I were to go to product, I think it's get started free. It sends me to that same place and then it just is empty. So it's a Postman issue. It's not our platform doesn't have a bad link. So in the actual email I sent you guys yesterday, there is a different route to go. You just go to pricing and then just do this free, the sign up, and then it'll sign up and it'll get you this application called Postman. So if you guys haven't already, I would download that. That way you can use it tomorrow because we're going to talk about Express and then we're going to mess around with Postman and our routing and we're going to start handling how we can do that. We're going to call some APIs too. You can call Pokemon, you can call a bunch of stuff for it. And then we're going to introduce MongoDB. So busy week, fun week though, because now we're really starting to put stuff together. We've already talked about HTTP verbs, which is awesome. Like we've already gotten there. We're going to handle routing, which we've sort of already done, but we'll talk a little bit different tomorrow in some folder structure. I think Gray might go over some folder structure tomorrow, which might be helpful. So other than that, so funny, Kat. I don't know why the link worked for you and not me. My Google Chrome has been weird though. Like I can't do Chat GPT on Google Chrome. It doesn't work. But if I use Safari, it does. So it's super weird. Maybe it's on me. But if it doesn't work, if it doesn't work for you, then good on you. But if it doesn't work, you can just go through pricing and then go to the free one. You don't need to pay. I've never paid ever. I use it all the time. So cool. That's what I have. I'm gonna stop the recording here.